At 2:47 in the morning on Wednesday, March 4th, 2026, something occurred inside the White House Situation Room that modern American crisis management history has never recorded. Mid-briefing, as satellites tracked live Iranian ballistic missiles streaking toward American bases, the President of the United States stood up and walked out. He did not leave for a personal break or a scheduled call. He left exactly as the screens in front of him displayed the red impact points of the retaliatory strike. According to confirmations from 3 senior administration officials, this absence lasted exactly 23 minutes. Analyze the gravity of those 23 minutes. It was the duration during which the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General C.Q. Brown, had to continue briefing on American casualties to empty chairs without a commander-in-chief to authorize a response. It was the window where Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth made 3 secret phone calls that his staff later refused to explain to the press. Most critically, it was the time when flight operations for the USS Abraham Lincoln were placed in a holding pattern because the military, despite being prepositioned for weeks, cannot fire without executive authorization. In the world of signals intelligence, 23 minutes is a vast void that every American adversary will study for decades. Because at the very moment the nation required a decisive pilot, the most powerful room in the world was left with nothing but advisors' debates, while the president chose to face the crisis in solitary silence elsewhere. This breakdown in command was not just a procedural error, it was the first sign of a systemic meltdown at the very pinnacle of American power. Go deep with me into what actually happened before that door slammed shut, because the term meltdown being used by reporters is not journalistic hyperbole. It is a clinical description of a president who had completely lost control. According to sources from CNN and Axios, Trump entered the Situation Room, not in the posture of a leader ready to lead, but in a state of agitation beyond the normal range. The fracture exploded when National Security Advisor Mike Waltz presented the preliminary damage assessment from Al-Assad. As soon as the word wounded was uttered to describe the condition of American service members, an extreme transformation occurred. Instead of focusing on operational options, the president vented his fury on the very people advising him. Listen closely to this detail, as it is the most disturbing part. According to Axios, Trump slammed his hand on the table and raised a doubt that no one in that room was prepared to hear. He openly questioned whether the American military had deliberately allowed the Iranian strike to happen. He suspected that the generals failed to prevent the missiles for the sole purpose of forcing his hand on an authorization he had been hesitating on for weeks. This was not just anger. It was strategic paranoia. At the moment when enemy missiles were still in the air, the President of the United States chose to attack the loyalty of his own military rather than strike back at the adversary. The subsequent arrival of Vice President J.D. Vance, a direct violation of continuity of government security protocols, is undeniable proof that the situation inside had exceeded the control of senior advisors. Vance entered not to observe, but because of an urgent judgment that the commander-in-chief's chair needed someone capable of maintaining composure, while the man sitting in it was busy with a conspiracy theory aimed at the Pentagon itself. While the president was slamming the table and questioning the loyalty of his own military, the screens in the Situation Room were displaying a far more brutal reality. Iran wasn't just firing a few missiles to save face. They had activated a precision-coordinated campaign that Tehran's military planners had meticulously prepared since June 2025. Iranian ballistic missiles struck 3 different locations within a time window lasting exactly 7 minutes. Look at this target list. The first location was Al-Assad Air Base in western Iraq. This is not an unfamiliar name. This is home to 2,500 American service members and the same site Iran targeted after the killing of Qasem Soleimani in 2020. But this time, there was no warning. 14 ballistic missiles rained down in the first salvo alone. And folks, this is where the word wounded was uttered. Although the exact number is being withheld by Washington, the fact that officials use this term during an emergency briefing indicates the scale of casualties is impossible to ignore. The second location was Muwafaq Salti Air Base in Jordan. This is the nest for 35 F-15E Strike Eagles that the U.S. had just repositioned to project force against Iran. By striking here, Iran sent a clear message. There are no safe zones for American air power in the region. And the third location, perhaps the most disturbing, a facility that the U.S. government, to this hour, refuses to name. In military parlance, when a site is unnamed, it can only be one of three things: a classified asset, a sensitive intelligence collection platform, or an installation whose public identification would reveal capabilities that American planners are not ready to disclose. The connection here is chilling. While the command center at the White House was falling into a state of paralysis due to the paranoia of its leader, the adversary was operating a war machine with second-by-second precision. 7 minutes, 3 countries, 3 strategic targets. Iran has proven they no longer fear social media threats. They are executing a real military campaign aimed at the backbone of the American presence in the Middle East. While chaos unfolded inside the most powerful room on earth, another war against the truth erupted right in the White House lobby. At 9:47 in the morning, 2 CNN journalists, Natasha Bertrand and Michael Conte, were detained by Secret Service agents at the press briefing room entrance. They weren't arrested in the traditional criminal sense, but their credentials were revoked and their access was permanently suspended. The reason given by the press secretary? Unauthorized disclosure of classified operational information. But look at what Natasha Bertrand actually published minutes earlier. It wasn't missile coordinates or nuclear launch codes. It was a single sentence revealing that the president expressed doubt about the proportionality of the military response and asked whether the authorization he had previously indicated was still operative. Doubt, proportionality, operative authorization. These 3 concepts were the reason 2 journalists were escorted away. This is an event without precedent in the modern American press system. Not under Nixon, not under Reagan. When an administration uses the legal framework of espionage not to target leakers, but to directly suppress journalists publishing information from named official sources, they are shattering the foundation of the First Amendment. The truth here is naked. The White House didn't detain them for what they had published, but for what they were about to publish next. They feared the world would learn of a commander-in-chief in a state of psychological meltdown, while American service members were under fire. Tonight, as the planet's largest news organizations sign a joint statement describing this as an unprecedented assault, we understand that the mask of transparency has fallen, leaving a machinery attempting to hide its internal fractures by silencing those striving to bring the truth to light. At 3 to 10 in the morning, the president returned to the Situation Room. Witnesses described his state with one word: composed calm. But not the calm of a man who has reflected deeply, but the calm of someone who has chosen to resolve all hesitation with the crudest power possible. He sat down, looked directly at General Brown, and asked for the third response option to be repeated. You need to understand what option 3 means in this context. Defense officials, speaking anonymously, have described it with the phrase, significantly escalatory. This is not a proportional retaliation aimed at the missile launchers that just fired from Iran. This is a leap across every red line the United States has maintained for 46 years since the hostage crisis. This choice goes far beyond what Operation Midnight Hammer achieved in June 2025. It targets assets that generals and advisors did not recommend for fear of an all-out war. But the president didn't ask about geopolitical risks. He asked exactly one question: how long does it take to execute? The connection here is devastating. After 23 minutes of solitude to deal with a psychological meltdown, Trump returned and chose the heaviest firepower available to prove he was still in command. He didn't choose the smartest or safest option for American service members. He chose the loudest option to silence the doubts about his own weakness. When a life-and-death national decision is made based on psychological validation rather than military strategy, we have crossed a threshold of danger that even the most optimistic planners could not have foreseen. As we discuss the president choosing option 3 as in the previous section, you might wonder, was that just talk to soothe his paranoid state? The answer lies on the ground, and it is more brutal than any social media post. Satellite imagery from Planet Labs has just confirmed a terrifying reality. The parking positions for the two Spirit strategic bombers at Whiteman Air Force Base, Missouri, are now empty. Out of the 7 B-2S that conducted Operation Midnight Hammer in 2025, at least 3 have scrambled. They have not appeared at Diego Garcia in the Indian Ocean. They have not appeared at RAF Fairford in England. And they have completely vanished from all civilian flight monitoring systems because when on a mission, these $2 billion stealth monsters never broadcast transponder signals. When Trump asked, "How long does it take to execute?" the Pentagon's answer was not just a number on a page. These stealth bombers, capable of carrying the heaviest bunker buster bombs in our arsenal, are currently somewhere between Missouri and a target set in Iran. Somewhere is the most dangerous phrase in the military dictionary tonight. The mobilization of this nuclear and strategic firepower occurred simultaneously with the White House detaining journalists for reporting on presidential doubt. This indicates a machinery running at full throttle to convert a psychological reaction into a literal campaign of destruction. Once the B-2S have left the runway, the door for diplomacy isn't just closed, it has been completely dismantled. We are no longer in the phase of deterrence. We are in the phase of executing an escalatory decision that even those in the Situation Room are unsure of its consequences for the survival of the world order. Look directly into the abyss we face tonight because history is repeating itself in the most brutal way. There is an inescapable comparison between what is happening right now and the Cuban Missile Crisis of 1962. Back then, President Kennedy took 13 days of intense deliberation with his advisors to choose a third path, a naval blockade, to buy time for diplomacy instead of a destructive strike. But tonight, President Trump spent exactly 23 minutes alone before returning to demand the most extreme escalation option. The difference between 13 days and 23 minutes is the difference between a strategic decision intended to save peace and a psychological reaction intended to save a personal image. As the diplomatic mask is stripped away to reveal detained journalists and stealth bombers slicing through the sky, we must admit that our crisis control architecture has broken. The final 4 words the president posted late at night, "Watch what happens next," are not a policy nor a diplomatic message. They are a high-stakes challenge aimed at an adversary also ready for Phase 2, targeting the global economy. While the families of the service members at Al-Assad still wait for the casualty lists to be released, and while financial markets evaporate trillions of dollars, we are entering a new chapter where all old rules are void. Tonight, as the B-2S remains silent on their way to targets, and while the Oman diplomatic channel desperately tries to stitch back the fragments of dialogue, we can only hope that the price of the composure following the meltdown is not a war no one can control. The world watches with bated breath because when the world's strongest superpower acts based on rage rather than vision, the result is something history calls the end.